June 1942. Rain pounded the ocean surface. Through thick fog, a massive battleship limped back to Japan, surrounded by an escort of warships. This vessel, named Yamato, wasn't just any ship. It was the symbol of the Japanese Navy and the flagship of the combined fleet. Just days earlier, Admiral Yamamoto Izoroku had launched an ambitious naval operation with nearly 200 warships of various types. According to his plan, Japanese carrier forces would destroy Midway's defenses and attack the defending American fleet. When the U.S. fleet was locked in desperate combat, Yamato would lead 10 battleships into sudden appearance on the battlefield, pulverizing the Americans with massive guns. But what Yamamoto couldn't have known was that American intelligence had cracked Japanese communications, revealing their true intentions to Admiral Nimitz. The Japanese attack on the Aleutian Islands, intended as a diversion, turned into a pointless waste of effort that only scattered their precious forces. Making matters worse, Japanese submarine forces failed to reach their designated positions in time, leaving them completely unaware of the secretly assembled American fleet. The battle erupted on June 4th. Japanese carrier aircraft first struck Midway's airfield. If the Japanese had just launched a direct landing assault at that moment, the island's defenders would have surrendered. Instead, 43 aircraft were shot down. These planes could have played a crucial role in the decisive carrier battle that unfolded hours later. Yamamoto still insisted on treating battleships as the main striking force. He even helpfully arranged 4 large carriers into a tight formation. This not only failed to fully leverage naval aviation advantages, but also made it easy for the Americans to find all their targets. The Yorktown, under emergency repairs in dry dock. This carrier's participation in battle was one of the keys to American victory. When that squadron of Blue Dauntless dive bombers swooped down, while Japanese planes were busy refueling and rearming, the Japanese Navy suffered its first devastating defeat since the war began. Japan lost 4 large aircraft carriers and all their aircraft, plus the cruiser Mikuma. Although the Japanese battleship formation remained unscathed and hadn't fired a single shot, they'd lost all air cover. After careful consideration, Yamamoto decided to retreat. The Americans pursued for 2 days, finally calling off the chase on June 7th. Due to heavy rain and fog, the combined fleet couldn't enter Hiroshima and instead docked at Hashirajima. A dejected Yamamoto discovered that while Japanese carrier forces still held numerical advantage, only these carriers remained fully combat capable: the large Zuikaku, the medium Junyo and Ryujo, and the light carriers Zuiho and Hosho. On June 20th, senior officers from Naval General Staff, shipbuilding and aviation departments, and other officials convened on Yamato to discuss the future of Japanese carrier forces. After 2 days of deliberation, the Japanese Navy reached these decisions: accelerate carrier construction, improve carrier design, strengthen training for damage control and firefighting teams, intensify pilot training, and reorganize naval aviation squadrons. They also decided to follow American Navy practice by rearming aircraft on the flight deck to speed up operations. However, judging from the subsequent formation of the Third Fleet and 2 other carrier groups, it's clear that even at this point, the Japanese Navy continued following their pre-war mobile fleet doctrine. They concentrated all carriers as striking forces while minimizing escort vessels. They still viewed battleships as the main force for decisive naval engagements, rather than following the American approach of balancing battleships and carriers into versatile task forces capable of both offense and defense. Carriers, more carriers. Before Midway, Japan had only 2 carriers under construction: the 29,300-ton Taiho and the 17,150-ton Unryu. Both were well-designed, fast fleet carriers, expected to be completed by late June and late September 1944 respectively. 3 converted passenger liners were also being transformed into carriers. Hayo, converted from the luxury liner Izumo Maru. Junyo, converted from Izumo Maru's sister ship Kashiwara Maru. And the 14,500-ton escort carrier Chuyo, converted from the passenger ship Nita Maru. The Taiyo-class escort carriers, slow speed, minimal aircraft capacity, used only for training and transport missions. Sister ships of Nita Maru had already been converted into the Taiyo-class escort carriers Taiyo and Unyo. But Japanese escort carriers were basically making do with what they had. They were slow, couldn't carry many aircraft, and couldn't coordinate operations with the combined fleet. The Japanese themselves knew exactly what these 3 carriers were worth. At best, they'd serve as training or transport ships. As for escort duty, that wasn't even on the table. Besides these carriers, there was also Ryuho, a light carrier converted from the submarine tender Taige. This carrier went through constant repairs and modifications, even swapping out its original diesel engines for steam turbines. It ended up becoming the first Japanese carrier hit by American bombs while still in dry dock during the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. When it finally entered service, the Navy constantly complained about its slow speed. But this turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it somehow survived until war's end. After Midway, the Naval General Staff studied the situation and began changing their basic policy on armaments and military production. They shifted their main focus to strengthening air power and expanding aircraft carrier production. To this end, they canceled pre-war shipbuilding plans and came up with an entirely new 5th Naval Armaments Supplement Program. Build over 20 aircraft carriers and duke it out with the Americans. According to this plan, beyond producing 20 new carriers, 1 incomplete battleship, several merchant ships, and naval auxiliary vessels would be converted into carriers. Several completed older warships would also have flight decks installed, with each ship planned to carry 22 dive bombers. Readers familiar with Pacific War history probably smiled knowingly when they saw that incomplete battleship planned for carrier conversion. That's right, it's the ill-fated Shinano. But what many might not realize is that initially, the Japanese military didn't intend to convert Shinano into a standard fleet carrier. Instead, they planned to use it as a floating, sea-based aviation facility. It wouldn't have its own air squadrons. It would simply allow aircraft from other carriers and land-based planes conducting shuttle bombing to land, refuel, rearm, or undergo repairs. This plan wasn't entirely unreasonable. During Midway, when a carrier got hit, its aircraft had to land on other carriers, causing chaos and accidents. One major reason American aircraft losses were relatively small was because Midway Island was nearby, allowing Navy planes to make emergency landings. The debate over Shinano resulted in it ultimately possessing its own air wing, but compared to its displacement and dimensions, the number of carrier aircraft was pathetically small. Just 47 planes. 8 A-6M0 fighters, 18 HE-B, 7 A-1 Ryusei attack aircraft, 6 Nakajima C, 6 N Sayun reconnaissance planes, and 5 reserve aircraft. This carrier was the first large fleet carrier of World War II. In fact, until the U.S. Navy's Forrestal launched in 1955, it remained the largest completed carrier in human history. Like Taiho, Shinano featured angled funnels, 4-inch deck armor, and speeds up to 27 knots. It bristled with anti-aircraft weaponry like a porcupine. 16 127mm guns, 145 25mm rapid-fire cannons. After all that effort, how did they forget to close the watertight doors? After Midway, Japan began converting 4 more vessels into light carriers, Chitose and Chiyoda, and the escort carriers Kaiyo and Shinyo, using naval auxiliary vessels and merchant ships. Combined with new ships from the construction program, if everything went according to plan, by late 1944, the Japanese Navy would possess 7 fleet carriers including Shinano, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, 12 by the end of 1945, 15 by the end of 1946, and 23 by 1948. Unfortunately, plans never survive contact with reality. Few items from the Japanese Navy's shipbuilding program were actually implemented. And somehow, those Army idiots actually built 2 Army escort carriers, Akitsumaru and Nigitsumaru. These 2 carriers had a rather creative design concept. Initially intended as landing craft carriers, they were simultaneously equipped with large cargo cranes and elevators. During combat, aircraft could only take off, then land on shore. They couldn't recover aircraft at all. Worth mentioning is that the Japanese Army used an autogyro called the Ka-1 on these carriers, which could take off in short distances. Armed with depth charges, it served as a dedicated carrier-based anti-submarine aircraft. Later, the Army planned to modify them by extending the flight deck aft to ensure Army planes could take off and land normally. But the Army's ambitions were destined to remain unfulfilled. In January and November 1944, the U.S. submarines Cobia and Queenfish, respectively, sank both Army carriers. The Japanese Navy finally partially converted the battleships Hyuga and Issei into carriers, installing flight decks and catapults on their sterns. Each ship could carry 22 aircraft. The heavy cruiser Mogami also underwent major surgery, but could only carry 11 aircraft. Originally, according to plan, including Hyuga, Issei, and Mogami, the Japanese Navy intended to convert 10 battleships and 13 heavy cruisers into carriers. Not half-and-half hybrids like battleship carriers, but genuine flat tops. When completed, battleship conversions would carry 55 aircraft, cruiser conversions 30. Then the Japanese looked at the conversion time frame and quietly tossed the plan into the trash. According to the schedule, each battleship needed 18 months for conversion, cruisers needed 9 months. With that kind of time, they might as well recruit more kamikaze human missiles. The Japanese naval aviation's pre-war selection process was so strict and training so rigorous that calling it 1 in 10,000 wouldn't be an exaggeration. This approach certainly produced some of the world's top fighter pilots, but the cost was unnecessarily eliminating too many normal candidates. Add to this that Japan's flight training system resembled a craft workshop, lacking scale and excessively pursuing perfection. When those veteran pilots were exhausted in the war's first 2 years, there was no one left to replace them. The military recognized this problem, but their solution wasn't to expand training school size and numbers or bring experienced ace pilots back to teach. Instead, they lowered selection standards, combined courses, and reduced student flight hours. Even with these relaxed standards, pilot numbers didn't increase much. Pre-war annual output was 2,000 qualified pilots, 2,300 in 1942, 2,700 in 1943. Numbers barely grew, but quality plummeted. From 1944 to 1945, Japanese Navy graduate pilots averaged 100 to 120 flight hours. Most only mastered basic land takeoffs and landings, carrier landings, air-to-air gunnery, aerial combat coordination. They knew nothing. For many rookies, their first carrier landing became their last. Many aircraft crashed into the water behind carriers during final approach due to misjudged distances. Planes frequently missed arresting cables, careening sideways into the island structure, or tumbling into the sea. Besides these accidents, novice pilots and mechanics would scrape against the island, get knocked down by wave crests, or simply slide off the deck into the ocean. In the eyes of Vice Admiral Ozawa Jisaburo, then commanding the Third Fleet, this was pure, self-destructive aerial combat. He had to halt rookie carrier training and have them practice more land-based takeoffs and landings to execute shuttle bombing strategies. Even with reduced difficulty, Japanese pilots kept crashing relentlessly. Due to excessive loss rates, when the Marianas Air Battle arrived, Japan could only deploy less than 1/3 of planned land-based aircraft. And their opponents, U.S. Navy and Marine Corps flight students, averaged 400 flight hours. Before reaching the battlefield, they'd been thoroughly drilled at fighter school by combat veterans fresh from the front lines. Beyond severe pilot shortages, Japanese Navy aircraft production couldn't even replace combat and training losses. Yet under these circumstances, Japan went all in during 1944, assembling a substantial mobile fleet, attempting one decisive naval engagement to seize initiative and repel American forces. In Operation Ago, the Japanese assembled 9 aircraft carriers, with 450 carrier aircraft, 50 more than the Pearl Harbor attack. Once again, Japan bet everything on this battle. Like Pearl Harbor and Midway, they planned to let luck decide the war's outcome, either win big or lose everything. But their opponents, Task Force 58, possessed 15 carriers and 950 carrier aircraft, far exceeding Japanese strength. Not to mention the American F-6F Hellcat fighters' performance far surpassed comparable Japanese aircraft, and American pilot combat experience and skills were beyond what Japanese pilots could match. During the fierce aerial engagement that erupted on the morning of June 19, 1944, American pilots easily shot down over 400 Japanese planes, including land-based aircraft. This air battle entered history books with the nickname Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, though the actual combat location was in the Philippine Sea. Future U.S. President George H.W. Bush participated in this air battle. However, the young Lieutenant Bush had terrible luck. Shortly after takeoff, his TBM Avenger bomber's engine failed and crashed into the sea. He was promptly rescued by a destroyer. The Japanese Navy's most humiliating moment was having both large carriers Taiho and Shokaku sunk by American submarines. Taiho not only had an armored flight deck, but also watertight compartments. Taking just one torpedo hit shouldn't have been a big deal, but fate had decided the carrier's destiny. An inexperienced damage control officer opened the ship's entire ventilation system, trying to disperse explosive vapors from damaged aviation fuel tanks. The result? Flammable gases spread throughout the ship. Eventually, a series of massive explosions tore apart this newest carrier during its first combat cruise. Shokaku sank around 2 p.m., hit by 3 torpedoes from the American submarine Kavala. With heavy losses, Ozawa had no choice but to retreat with his fleet. That evening, reconnaissance aircraft from Admiral Mitcher's force spotted the Japanese fleet 400 kilometers away. On June 20th, 200 American bombers sortied again, sinking another Japanese carrier, Hio, and damaging 4 others, Zuikaku, Chiyoda, Junyo, and Ryuho. The Japanese should consider themselves fortunate that due to insufficient light and limited torpedoes, 2 oil tankers took their place. Otherwise, probably none of Japan's 9 carriers would have survived. This air battle was the fifth and largest carrier engagement of World War II. Submarines and aircraft from Task Force 58 sank 3 Japanese carriers and 2 tankers, destroyed over 400 Japanese carrier aircraft, and about 100 land-based fighters, plus numerous seaplanes. Unfortunately, Admiral Spruance was overly cautious, causing the American fleet to miss opportunities to destroy more Japanese warships. Although later historians heavily debated Spruance's decisions during this battle, regardless, Japan's carrier forces were utterly crushed. Never again would Japanese forces mount a major carrier-based attack against American fleets. Upon returning to base, Ozawa Jizaburo submitted his resignation as per custom, taking responsibility for this unprecedented defeat. But Admiral Toyota Soemu refused his resignation, stating his command contained no errors. During the Battle of Saipan, a burning, shot-down Japanese plane crashes near the escort carrier Kitkun Bay. It was precisely after this carrier battle and Saipan's fall that Japan's military leadership, especially within the Navy, completely lost confidence in victory. Even officers, who still hoped for a turnaround after Midway, now finally realized that Japan's defeat was irreversible. The Japanese carrier force and Navy's final sortie was at Leyte Gulf. Zuikaku and 3 other small carriers, representing Japan's last carrier forces, were smashed to pieces under continuous attacks from 5 American fleet carriers and 5 light carriers. From that point, Japanese carrier forces never undertook combat missions again. Before Japan's surrender in 1945, of the 10 remaining carriers, only 1 escaped unscathed. The other 9 were destroyed or sunk. After the war, America objectively evaluated Japan's pilot training system. The Japanese underestimated the value of these well-trained pilots, while simultaneously underestimating the difficulty of replacement training. Consequently, they sacrificed aircraft safety margins for suicide missions. They never considered rescuing downed pilots during offensive operations, nor did they consider the importance of rotating pilots during combat missions. More importantly, when they realized Allied aviation strength was rapidly expanding, they focused only on deploying massive numbers of pilots rather than fewer highly skilled ones to achieve victory. Relying on suicidal attacks was hopeless. Compared to what the U.S. Navy demonstrated during World War II in carrier and aircraft production and pilot training, Japanese performance in every aspect could only be called second-rate.